So today on EmpowerU, we're talking about boundaries and attachments. So, I mean, this could be a very long, lengthy, detailed conversation, but we're going to keep it as short and sweet as we can. So let's talk about maybe attachments. And I think what's really important is that people understand, like, I think we sometimes create these buckets and it's like people have the idea that they only get attached to people and relationships. But ultimately, we form attachments to emotions, circumstances,
so many things.
Everything.
Everything there's some form. Even me, like someone asked me today, like I'm getting offered right now about $10,000 more for my Jeep to sell it.
Yeah.
Based on the market right now.
Right.
And it was like, we should do that. It's a good profit on like a 5-year car. But I'm like, but I want my Jeep.
Yeah.
And they're like, why so attached to this Jeep? I'm like, I just love them. And now I'm like, wait a minute. Like, I feel like that's a part of who I am.
Yeah. And that's what we do, right? We create these attachments. And the reason why we create attachments is because we come out of a place of desire where we want things, right? And it's a very low line energy. Whenever you're attached to things, then when those things are removed or, they exit your life, you're stuck in a state of grief where you're mourning the loss of something. Now, ultimately, we create attachments out of voids and trauma that is unresolved. And then we look for ways in our human experience to fill those voids with experiences, things, people, animals, all those things. And I mean, just like the Buddha and, the higher realm individuals that have come to this place, is that the idea is to be devoid of attachments. You shouldn't be attached to anything. And sometimes that sounds a little harsh for people because, of course, we're humans. That is our nature, is to build these attachments. But ultimately, the goal in life should be to be devoid of any attachments. You
don't really own anything. As I always say, like when you come into this world, you're pretty much naked. When you leave, you're naked. So like at the end of the day, you're just kind of borrowing time and what's around you, right?
And really, like, you have everything within you to be fulfilled, to not need those attachments. And I think of even parenting where people form, trauma bonds with their children and they form these attachments. And it's all about control. And again, it comes from a place, like a lower vibrating place, because when you want to control, then you're stuck in a state of, lower energies because you're coming from a place of block. And so, I always ask this question now: what value does this person or does this experience or does this thing bring into my life? So then I can better understand, why am I attracting this and why do I have a desire for this? And if I look at the value, and again, it's not coming from a place of ego, because if you're inviting someone or an experience into your life that really you can't identify the value, then it's detrimental to you and that person or that experience, because you're not coming into it wholesomely and from a place of love and compassion. You're coming from a place of, grief, fear, desire. And so it's just that shift of asking yourself, what value does this attachment bring into my life? And just identifying and creating the awareness is huge, and allowing yourself to mourn every time you lose an attachment or that attachment leaves your life.
Of course.
And the mourning and the grief is so important, right? Because again, that's a wound that we have. And it's so counterproductive and intuitive to tell people, sit with your pain. Whether it's physical pain, it's emotional pain, sit with your pain and really feel it so that you can then release it and heal it. And if you don't do that, then you're going to continue to form attachments.
Yeah, you're one thing to the next. It's like when I used to get people off smoking. Back in the day, I used to get on the hockey dads and ask me, what's a good remedy? I'm like, well, instead of like you smoking a cigarette, because it's a social thing for most of them, have a lollipop and scent. So they were attached to smoking because of the social aspect of it. And then I introduced something that's similar to it. And now they got this new thing. It's a little bit better than I would think than smoking at the time, but now they've got a new thing. So sometimes people just kind of ditch one for the other.
Evolving attachments, right? But again, nonetheless, anytime you're attached or you need something or you've created an expectation of something, you have an attachment to it. Yeah. And again, the goal in life is to not have attachments and to really be autonomous and whole in who you are. And, addiction, all those things, those are attachments. And if you're resonating in a place of desire, there's a good chance you're going to start to form attachments. Or if you're in a place of like apathy, where it's poor me, you become dependent on other people and situations to give you what you can't give yourself. And that's what an attachment is. And it's very superficial and fleeting. And that's why a lot of people get stuck in a state of grief and desire. And they just circle through that where it's like, I want, I lost, I feel, and then going back.
I always tell people to read that book, Letting Go, 1,000 times over, because it's exactly when I was going through very similar things. And I was really attached to an identity and a business, and that was taking both things from me. And I'm like, what? Like, how do I cope with this thing? And then that book, Letting Go, came in. I'm like, okay, now I have a better understanding of like, yes, you should have the desire and want for the thing, but let go how it happens and let go of that like identity or attachment to it. Because at the end of the day, like that'll ruin you if you kind of get caught constantly in that. We see relationships too when people separate or break up and then they feel like they've lost a part of them. Like I lost a person, I've lost my friend.
Yeah.
Right. And so that same thing goes, and just know like everything kind of ebbs and flows. If that person's supposed to be in your life, it'll happen. Or they're making room for something better. There's so many reframes in those times you can just change the way you think about the situation, and that leads you in a different direction, right?
And you often, like when you mourn the loss of those attachments, you're mourning the loss of what that represented for you. And again, that's why it's important to identify the value, because often, you know, if you lose a pet, for example, I'm not diminishing the value and the relationship you have with that pet, but ultimately that pet has become, you formed a trauma bond with that pet. And so you're looking for the coping mechanism that pet provided you with. And once that's gone, it's like you're scrambling thinking, how am I going to cope? But people who are not aware of those attachments, they see it as a loss of life itself. Like when people mourn the loss of something, whether it's a person or experience, they see it as like life has ended itself. And so we throw everything in that bucket, but ultimately it's a chance and an opportunity for people to look at identifying what value things bring into their life and then to fulfill that within yourself. You know, so that I guess that kind of brings us into boundaries, because I do feel that boundaries can help people remove themselves and heal their attachments. And I mean, I define boundaries as rules you create for yourself to keep yourself safe and to keep other people safe. And that's the counterintuitive piece of boundaries. People think, well, no, if I'm setting rules and setting these boundaries, then I'm hurting people.
No, it's the opposite of that. Like I at one point in my life, I was doing like online coaching, like before Zoom was even a thing with Skype. And I was working with Bob, so I used to get lots of people reach out from all over the world wanting advice. And so I thought, you know what, that'd be a nice charitable gesture of me to maybe offer free just sessions. And I must have banged out like 8 to 10 a day. I was so busy just talking and doing this and doing this and doing this. And then I actually collapsed in my own condo. My parents found me. And I'm like, what happened? And then I finally figured out like I was over giving and not setting those boundaries. Okay, you don't have to do all of these people. Like I felt like I was owed to answer everybody. So now like I'll pick and choose if I want to do something, right? Even with work, sometimes I'll get like somebody would say, here's the price, or I'll give a quote and they're like, oh wait, like that's too expensive. So when I worked with Bobby, it was either you do it for free or you do it for your rate. So sometimes I'll have to make those decisions and be like, do I feel like doing this project, even if I'm not going to make the money I want, or am I going to pass on it? And so I battled with a lot more over the last 10 years, but I was thinking getting a lot better now.
Well, and it's a hard thing to do, because one of the most challenging things I've ever had to do is set boundaries with the people you love, right? Your family and the people that you're supposed to have a close connection with, and to set boundaries that are healthy for me, but also in turn, you know, because my intention is to really be of benefit and of value to everyone, those intentions aren't just for me, they're for others. And if I'm removing myself to create a safe environment, then everyone's going to benefit, whether they're aware of it or not. And that's the thing, people may not understand your boundaries, and there's a good chance they're never going to understand them.
And you have to do for you. Like even, you know, last night, I didn't want to train a specific person. She's a young girl. Sometimes she gives me headache, sorry. So I'm like, how do I deal with a child, right? So I knew I had about 30 minutes before that person was coming in, and I could have just sat around and waited. But I was like, you know what? Exercise usually changes how I feel. So I went on the bike, I went up for 30 minutes, and that hour flew by. It was so much fun. But that was something that I needed to do to make myself feel good so I can serve people properly. So
well, you set a boundary for yourself, right? And I honestly think that the medicine wheel is probably a great place to start when it comes to boundaries, because those 4 quadrants are areas in our life that we can set boundaries for. So, you know, you have the mental plane, you have the intellectual plane, the emotional, and the spiritual. So, you know, one great book, which is How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicola Pera, and she goes through a great process, and I wrote it down here to help people. And the first step is you have to identify your boundary. Now, again, if you look at the medicine wheel, there's different types of boundaries that you can look at: physical boundaries, mental boundaries, intellectual, and spiritual. And she has she has physical and mental, and then she has resource. So when people need your time, when you're coming at it as a resource for people, and people or your friends who constantly seek you to vent or to tell you their problems, you have to look and say, okay, what value is this situation bringing into my life? And then set a boundary for yourself. And again, it could be a physical boundary, a mental boundary, like you did at the gym. You set yourself a mental boundary, right? And again, you get to make the rules up. No one gets to set your boundaries for you or tell you what your boundaries should and should not be. That's based on your life experiences and the rules that you decide to create. And then, you know, so first define the boundary, and then, you know your limits and communicate what that boundary is to yourself and to the people in your life. And it's important for people to also, when they're communicating boundaries, like, this isn't an ultimatum. this isn't a, if you, you have to respect my boundary or else. It's more of a place of compassion and love and saying, I'm doing this for myself. You can choose to respect it or not. And this is a boundary that is healthy for me and in turn healthy for you, whether you realize it or not. And then set the boundary. And then the work is always in maintaining the boundary, right? Because your life's going to change, situations are going to change, relationships are going to change. So it's not something that you set in stone. It's something that's evolving, and you're going to change your boundaries, maybe even daily, or set new ones daily. And that's your entitlement to create a safe space that's healthy for you, is to set. And it, again, probably one of the biggest things I've ever implemented are boundaries. And they also can be set to help you work through attachments, because if you have boundaries, that they will basically prevent you from forming attachments. So if you set the right boundaries with yourself, then you won't have attachments. For example, set boundaries in relationships, like you're only going to give a certain amount of yourself to someone. Like you're set, like that giving and receiving exchange has to be there, even with clients. Am I giving too much? Am I taking on too much? Like set.
You have to know, I was really bad in, well, I'm better now, but maybe 5 years ago, boundaries with clients, right? I would always answer a client no matter what time of day, didn't matter what they needed, pick up the phone. I was on time off, I'd do it, just answer, because I've always worked for myself, and that was kind of it. But when I was doing that, I started noticing the people that were around me were really getting, annoyed by that. And I'm like, well, if I value these people in my life, I should probably set a boundary where I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So then I had clients come back, felt like, I didn't real weekend, like, what's going on? And I had to tell them, like, listen, like, it's getting to the point now where I'm so busy with clients, I can't be answering your questions, which you probably could have Googled. You probably could have saved to the next time I see you. It's not do or die. And so my thing now with my clients, like, listen, you can text me, call me, whatever you want, but if you don't answer from me, just know that that's my time.
It's the boundary.
It's the boundary. And if it's do or die, I will answer you. But again, we're talking fitness here. We're not talking like,
No, but anything in life, like I've had to do that with clients as well, where it's like, respecting that this is my boundary and I'm communicating within this boundary. And I find that when you set boundaries, because often what happens is we don't set boundaries and then people take advantage of us, is the expression we use. And then we become angry with ourselves and we start to kind of revel in shame and guilt and like, why did I let that happen? I can't forgive myself. And ultimately it's like, whoa. Did I set the boundary? Did I identify the boundary, set it, and really implement it? No, I didn't. So that's
not, you can't
on me.
You can't get mad. It's on you, right?
Yeah.
So usually when that happens, I feel when I get like anxious or annoyed with something, then I'm like, okay, my boundary push.
Yeah.
So then it's like, did I articulate that properly? Did I explain myself? And usually no. So if I then reiterate what my boundary is and how I want to move with somebody, they then will respect it a little more.
Well, that's a good point. So the trigger here to pay attention, if you really want to start to explore boundaries, is, anytime you feel like you've been taken advantage of, that people are stepping all over you, or that you're frazzled because you can't control your schedule or your time or your resources to people, there's a good chance you need to work on your boundaries in that specific area. So I would say, become aware of when you're triggered in that way, and then sit down with yourself and define your boundary. And whether or not you implement it, just define it and create the awareness, because the awareness is paying attention to things. And once you define your boundary, then it's up to you whether or not you want to set it and communicate it, and then working on it every day.
And those things can change too, right? Sometimes you'll have like, hey, this is what it is. And then some days you're like, no, I'm going to change that rule, right? Because we always make our own rules for our boundaries and things, right?
And it's a learning process, right? Like, and again, be kind and compassionate with yourself. When you find yourself triggered and you're like, I feel like this person took advantage of me, whatever that might look like. And hold on, let me own it and be accountable. Because as soon as you own it, you're in control of changing it. And so saying like, okay, that was a lesson. So now I know I need to set this kind of boundary in this situation with this experience. Wow. And then again, like you said, it's going to change. So, we are human and life is about learning and evolving. So every experience, just be grateful and gracious with yourself that you get to have these experiences. Forgive yourself for showing up in the way that you knew how and you knew best how to. And now set a boundary. And then start to implement that boundary, and you can do it slowly. And once you start doing it, you feel empowered, because now you feel in control of your life and in control of the circumstances that you're experiencing, because you're setting the rules of engagement. You're creating the parameters for which people get to engage and connect with you, not the other way around. So boundaries are so incredibly important, and attachments are important too, because they teach you about your trauma and where you need to do the work. So I hope this helped. I hope it creates some awareness for you and you start to practice the art of creating boundaries, because it will set you free in the end.